Hi everyone, welcome back to Hive Reads. We are reading a short story from Color Outside the Lines, Stories About Love. This one is called Death and the Maiden. It is by Tara Sim. And in the first part of the story, we met Parvani, who is her wedding day, and she's also traveling to the Underworld to meet Hades. All we really know about why she's traveling there is to avenge someone named Rania. Yes, Rania. We don't know who Rania is or what relation she is to Parvani quite yet. We just know that Parvani has decided this is something she needs to do. So her mother took her to the edge of the Underworld, and Parvani walked the rest of the way in. She met Hades. And she took a bite of the fruit, which is, how the deal was made as far as Herbani staying in the Underworld. So we will pick up right where we left off. Hades' palace was surrounded by asphodel. The white stone building was built into the side of what looked to be a mountain, and for a moment, Parvani forgot that they were supposed to be beneath the earth. There was a sky here, dark and gray, with winking lights that could have been stars or jewels. The valley was mostly barren, not verdant like the valley beyond her city's walls. Except for the asphodel, they swayed in a light breeze, their white palms open, tinged with purple. Parvani followed Hades inside, through more columns and down long hallways, past crumbling statues missing heads and arms, over veined marble floors. Her shivering grew worse. Her mouth and fingers were sticky with mango juice. Hades walked through an archway, and Parvani saw a large bedchamber beyond. The bed was a wide and foreign thing, draped in black and scarlet silks. Hades bent her head and silently walked back out. Parvani stood there a moment, uncertain, but when it was clear Hades wasn't coming back, she finally let her shoulders sag. She twisted her bangles off, lifted her veil, and carefully removed her bridal jewelry. She was wondering how she would get out of her clothes when the shadows in the corners of the room moved toward her. Fear clutched her throat. But these shadows had the same gentle caresses as the ones in the cave, so she forced herself to relax and let them assist. Once out of her heavy dress and jewelry, she could breathe. A white nightgown was laid out on the bed, and she slipped it on before turning to a large silver-wreathed mirror on the wall. She paused. The mark was still on her forehead, the last vestige she had of the world of the living. She took a moment to memorize herself like this, still caught between one world and the next. Then she moved to the water basin and washed the mark off. When Hades returned, Parvani was sitting on the edge of the bed. Hades had removed her veil and bone crown so that Parvani could gaze freely upon her face. It was cold and beautiful as the marble surrounding them, her cheekbones high and her mouth sinfully red. Her eyes, when they rested on Parvani, were the blue-gray of agate. Parvani shook. She tried to think of Rania's smile, her laugh, her stories. You know what to do. This is my choice. Slowly, carefully, as if trying to avoid aggravating the snake, she lay back upon the bed. Hades watched, without a shift of expression, but she came to the side of the bed and sat there. Her presence, like the first breeze of approaching winter, or the clean, cold air of night. Parvani attempted to hide her uneven breathing. Her heart would have pounded, if it were still capable of doing so. Her nightgown was thin, and Hades looked down, as one starving looks at a feast. Fingers as white and cold as bone came to rest upon her chest. Parvani flinched. Hades froze, then slowly removed her hand. She stood, as fluid and dark as water. Parvani sat up. Where are you going? Hades stopped in the archway and looked over her shoulder. I do not touch the unwilling. She laughed, and Parvani battled with relief and despair. She held her head in her hands. She finally allowed herself to weep. She dreamed of her city, how it used to be, how she wanted to remember it. Cramped houses along winding dirt roads, bright jewel-colored kites blown in spring, the comforting lights of autumn festivals. She slept deep and undisturbed. She didn't see Hades for a few days. Still gripped by an instinctual fear, Parvani was fine with this arrangement. But once the fear wore off, she grew bored. She took to wandering the palace, wiping her fingers over dusty mantles and listening to the solitary echo of her own feet against marble. No one else resided in the palace, from what she could see. It was only her and the shadows, which trailed after her like a lady in waiting. Parvani found clothes for herself in a grand bureau in her bedroom. Their bedroom? And was startled to find that they were in the style of her people. Long tunics embroidered with silver and gold thread, silk pants, trailing fabrics in colors that could rival a parrot's plumage. Had Hades done this for her? It was also a surprise to find food and drink whenever she required it. She was sitting on a balcony overlooking the garden when she suddenly grazed her mother's teeth, and turning to the small table beside her, she was startled to find a silver tea tray. The tea tasted almost as good as her mother's, creamy and spicy and sweet. And every night she was greeted with dreams that left her aching in the morning. Dreams of home, her mother, Rania, the adventures they would never have. Eventually, boredom gave way to annoyance. She had come here with a purpose, and it was her duty to see it through. She couldn't do that if Hades was warning her. Finally, she found Hades sitting in the dining room where Parvani liked to take her meals. The room had an open wall framed by arches that oversaw the valley below. The sky was pearlescent, giving everything a monochrome look, but the lanterns inside provided much needed color. Hades sat at the head of the table, hands folded in her lap. She wore a demure black dress with long sleeves that tapered into gloves that covered only her palms. Her antlered crown was perched on her head of dark hair, which fell in hypnotizing waves. Hades looked up when Parvani entered. She didn't say anything, just sat there and watched her with those steady eyes. Parvani bit the inside of her cheek and sat on the opposite end of the table. Her plate was already filled with the things she loved: spinach and potato pastries with pomegranate chutney, chewy flatbread smothered in butter and garlic, chicken in a rich milky sauce studded with peas. Mint tea had been poured for her, as well as wine. They were silent a moment. Then Hades began to nibble off the flatbread, and Parvani laughed. Hades lifted one perfectly arched eyebrow. "Sorry," Parvani blurted. "I just didn't know you ate." Hades put the piece of flatbread down. "I don't have to. I like to, though." Oh. Now, feeling guilty that she'd made herself self-conscious. Was it possible for a god to feel self-conscious? Parvani took a long sip of tea and began to eat her own food. It was delicious. It was always delicious here. The silence turned heavy, a storm cloud about to shed its rain. Parvani swallowed more tea and peered at Hades through her lashes. She couldn't afford Hades running off again. She needed a strategy. "I'm sorry," Parvani said softly, "about how I reacted that night." Hades inclined her head knowingly. Parvani reached out an unsteady hand and touched the side of the god's face. It was smooth and soft, a surprising contrast to something deadly, like the bone knife her hand had felt. Framing the god's face with her hand, she leaned down to kiss her. It was cold at first, her lips a little numb, but then she felt Hades touch her waist, and heat darted through her unexpectedly. Hades kissed her back, soft, but a little uncertain. She smelled like jasmine blossoms at midnight, cold and tempting, a secret hidden sweetly in the dark. Then Hades pulled away, distrust in her eyes. "Not like this," Hades murmured. Hades took a good look at her, registered the frustration in Parvani's voice. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You want something," she deduced. Parvani backed away, holding onto one wrist with a hand that still burned from Hades' touch. "Tell her. Ask her." "Well," Hades demanded, "what is it?" Parvani took in a breath and lowered herself to her knees, head bent. "Hades, please. There's a man." A soft snort above her. And you want to be with him? Parvani flushed. It was true there was a boy back home she'd once been sweet on, but he'd had his sights set on the tailor's daughter. No, she said heavily. It's my people are in trouble. A man rules over us, but he's corrupting us, turning us against each other. My city was once rich, and is now becoming impoverished. Wars are started that we do not want to fight. She closed her eyes, but a tear escaped her way. Please, Hades, you must help me. As your wife, I beg of you. You must. No. Parvani's head snapped up, her tears drying. Hades met her gaze levelly. I do not kill men for sport, Hades went on, especially those who are not in my domain. I tend to the souls who come here. That is all. Parvani clenched her fist against the marble floor. You don't understand. Her voice was a ragged whisper. He took her, my friend, Rania. Her brother was killed in the war that Hajan started. They sat up for hours. They had sat for hours upon Rania's bed. Parvani had held her, rocked her, cried with her. Grief was a weight, and Rania had carried a world of it. One day, Hajan's heir was in the city with his guards. They passed Rania's house. In her grief, she ran outside with the kitchen knife. She tried to harm Hajan's son, but she was caught, and Parvani could not forget it. Her friend's body swung from the gibbet among the thieves and traitors, her beautiful face bloated with blood, her smile forever gone. Her tears began again. Please, Hades, I'm begging you. If you've come to the Netherworld solely for this, you should have trained to become an assassin instead. Hades stood with a growl of her chair legs. My duty will not be tarnished, not for your revenge. She left, and Parvani once again found herself alone and bitter, not even the shadows coming in to comfort her. Her jaw tightened, and she looked out one of the archways. Fine. If Hades would not help her, she would find a way to avenge Rania herself. Right. We'll take another break there. So we have now learned who Rania is. She's a friend of Parvani's, so that's who she wants to avenge. She was hoping that she would be able to marry Hades, and that Hades would do this favor for her, help her avenge her friend's death. Clearly, that did not go as well as Herbani thought it would. She's going to have to take it into her own hands to avenge Rania's death. So next time, we will see what happens. Thank you for joining me, and happy reading. Bye.